Hi, good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us. Oops, what am I doing? Okay. It doesn't matter. So, we welcome you to this plenary. We are going to discuss some really difficult issues, but that are really important and that we believe that are at the core of what the world is today, what is going to be. And if discussion is sometimes difficult to the left, if our countries have different historical circumstance and geographic circumstance that can change our approach, we believe that then we should talk about it. That's what we do with Ella. We talk about things. We know that we have common goals that are really important. We want peace. We know that NATO has not been the solution. We know that Putin is a danger to all the world. We know there's a genocide going on in Gaza. And we know that all over the world we have wars. The self-determination of the people is not guaranteed and it's under attack. And we have Donald Trump with rising the aggressivity and war all over the world. And so when the right, the far right, and the powers established have this growing way of looking to the future as just a big war, they don't have nothing to offer but war. All they have is war. The left needs to stand up and to be able to offer an alternative project, knowing the difficulties that we have all over the world. And to do so, we have here in this plenary and we have here in this Congress also people that come from different regions that are affected directly by the war because we wanted to listen to them also, and that are in movements. And so for us it's really important that today you have here represented parties of Ella, and we will introduce everyone, but we have here Podemos, and we have here Left Alliance from Finland, we have here the Red Green Alliance from Denmark, but we also have them from Turkey, and we also have Hal-Haq, that stands for the Palestinian people, and we also have the representation of the social movement in Ukraine. And that is how we work together. When we were preparing this Congress, of course, we knew that what was going on in Gaza and in Palestine and the genocide government of Israel should be stopped, and that is our political document and our first political decisions. We also know and been discussing the war of aggression of Russia on Ukraine, and that is also one of the core issues that we've been talking about. And of course, we know about the situation of the Kurdish people and the attacks not only in Turkey. But as you all know, these last few days also changed a little bit for the worse what we are discussing. We now have a march to Gaza and people are being arrested. The activists that want to enter Gaza are being arrested in Egypt right now. Some of them don't have contact with anyone. And Israel bombed Iran, so you know what the escalation in the Middle East is all about. So we were already worried. Well, situation is really dangerous right now. When something is dangerous, we need to act. We cannot be frightened to have responses, to create alternatives. And that's what we are doing here, with all our differences, but with this common goal to build peace and to talk to everyone that is affected directly by the war, and of course, to be able to condemn all the ones that are responsible directly or by their complicity, as European Union leaders are, for what is going on in the world. That's what we are doing today. And so I hope this plenary will help us to get stronger on those alternatives and also to understand what we have in common, what our difference can be, and how we work together, even so. So thank you so much, and Malin.
Thank you, Katarina. And I will not add to that introduction, but as Katarina said, we, the European Left Alliance for the People and the Planet, we're a platform of cooperation, a European political party for, of course, European parties. But for us, it's extremely important to work with movements or parties across different regions where we need to know exactly what's happening and give voice to those witnesses also. So actually, the first statement that the European Left Alliance did was in solidarity with Ukraine. It was our first statement because it was very clear that our alliance will stand in solidarity with Ukraine. There are some differences in positions in terms of arms and things like that, but the solidarity with the struggle of Ukraine against Russian imperialism and war of aggression was there from the very start. And I'm very happy that you are here, Vitaly Dudin from Social Nerouge, social movement in Ukraine. Please, the microphone is yours.
Thank you, Katarina. Thank you, Malin. Dear brothers and sisters, I'm pleased to be in such a good company today, in such a safe place, because now we have a very exhaustive war in our country, and political process is far from the perfect, and sometimes it's difficult even to sit down and think about the future. So I came here to imagine the perspectives of better politics for Ukraine. And the inspiration from your ideas is very valuable for Socialny Ruch and me personally. So I came here from the other side of the Europe, where the problems with physical danger, with poverty, with corruption are much more harsh than here in European Union. But despite this fact, we believe in solidarity, and our people are willing to continue their struggle, despite the fact regardless the fact how much time it will take. But we believe in independent, socially fair Ukraine. And I want to stress that this panel, it's also the unique opportunity for me to see the broader picture of the world and understand the interconnection between struggle of people of different nations against their oppression. So thank you very much for invitation. Thank you very much for giving me a speech. It was about the positive, and now back to reality. And Ukraine now under big threat, and I understand that all of you recognize the global threat which is coming from the Russian Federation. And I can not only speak about imperialism, but also feel it in my everyday life, because I live mostly in Kiev, which is bombed almost every day by rockets and drones from Russia. And we don't want to be a colony, neither of Russia nor of USA. Now the colonial attitude from both of those agents became obvious, and it liberated the Ukrainian people from plenty of illusions concerning the role of NATO, concerning the interests of US, concerning the usefulness of capitalism and how it can help people to, I don't know, maintain their needs. So I think that it's a good precondition for forming a left-wing movement in the future. People became more mature. You should understand that the leftist movement now not in the best situation because of the Soviet trauma, and then because Russia tried to instrumentalize so-called communist or leftist movement in our country. That's why people are very careful concerning the left ideas, and even such basic ideas as solidarity and social equality, unfortunately, they were discredited. So we working not in an easy conditions, but thanks to you, thanks to your everyday support of Ukraine and understanding the need for solidarity against Russian aggression, we have a hope. We have hope that one day we will be accepted by Ukrainian society. And now we managing to build solidarity network and to protect people's social rights even despite the war. And why it is possible? Because Ukraine managed to preserve its democratic institutions. And we have courts which are working even sometimes even during the air alarm. So I think that Ukraine managed to preserve the basic conditions for democratic development, and it is something that you cannot imagine, for example, in Putin's Russia. And I think that socialists from Russia can easily confirm that fact. Also, I want to stress that you should not underestimate the threat of military danger, which is exists all over the world. And I think that the process of expanding or increasing the military spending will be felt almost in all countries of European Union. And it will make some dilemmas for left movement. First option is to make a feeling like war is not serious, it's a local issue, and it will not affect your country, it will not threaten your people, but yes, and in that way you can fight against those military spendings because they are against social spending, for example. But there is another option, is to mobilize and demand better funding for the most relevant needs, most relevant public needs. And I think that leftists and the European Left Alliance will have enough strength to mobilize people to fight for the better welfare and also for security. I think that the leftists cannot ignore the reality. We should not fight the reality, but we should fight imperialism. Putin attacks when he sees someone weak, when he sees disunity. So we should be strong. We should united. We should be united. And yesterday we heard a lot about fighting against far-right populism. That's true. We should be united against neo-fascism and right-wing populism. But we should also fight against Putinism, which is the source of power for ultra-conservative, neo-fascist and right-wing populists. And I will come to the end. I ask all of you to think what you can do for people in need under the threat of military aggression for people of Ukraine, of Palestine, for Kurdish people, but also you should make a home task in your countries. You should ask yourself, is your political, social, and economical system is strong enough to withstand against the military threat? How those institutions can help to lower the suffering of people if some disaster will come. And I think that if Ukrainian people will win the battle for its freedom, which is also the battle against authoritarianism in all world, it will unleash the revolutionary potential of Ukrainian people, and we will join your struggles for better social rights and democratic freedoms. And I want to end with words of my favorite singer, Pete Seeger. Which side are you on? Yes, it's the most fundamental question of today. And now, applause to my friend from Palestine who will talk after me. Thank you very much. Long live international solidarity. And welcome to Kiev. Welcome to Kiev. See you in peaceful Ukraine, peaceful and socially prosperous.
Thank you so much, Vitaly, for your intervention. Now I have the pleasure to introduce Hamed. I don't know if I know how to say your name, so I'm so sorry. Hamed Haboful, is that correct? Okay, thank you so much. He comes from he's an expert in international law that works with Al-Haq. That is an institution that works, that has its headquarters in Ramallah in the West Bank, but also works in the Netherlands near in Hague, and so near the court also. And so, well, thank you so much for being here. As you know, stopping the genocide and standing up for the right of the Palestinian people to live freely on their own country is a compromise that unites us, all of us. And so for us, it's really important to have you here. Thank you.
Distinguished colleagues, comrades, and friends, thank you for the invitation. It's an honor to address you today on behalf of Al-Haq Europe, which is a human rights organization based in Brussels and work in close partnership with Al-Haq and other Palestinian human rights organizations. Al-Haq was established in 1979. Was the first Palestinian human rights organization in the region. I address you today not simply as an international lawyer, but as someone who's speaking from within the heart of the genocide that much of the world has chosen to ignore, enable, or profit from. The Palestinian people in Gaza are being starved and annihilated, and yet the so-called international community, especially in the West and in Europe, continues to fund, arm, and shield the perpetrators. Let's be clear, Israel's assault on Gaza is not a war. It's a settler colonial genocide, a colonial erasure of the indigenous Palestinian people. It is the result of a broader architecture of impunity. Over 77 years of the Nakba, 58 years of the illegal belligerent occupation, the longest occupation in modern history. Over 18 years of a blockade on the Gaza Strip, an open-air prison, as the UN described it, where over 2.3 million Palestinians, half of whom are children, over 75% of whom, including myself and my family, are refugees who were ethnically cleansed from their ancestor land during the 1948 Nakba. This is indeed a critical moment. In Gaza, settler colonial crimes are committed in broad daylight with the support and acquiescence of powerful Western states, including in Europe, what I would call the axis of genocide. From Ukraine to Palestine, international law is being weaponized, selectively enforced and advocated for, or wholly abandoned, as we see in Palestine, depending not on principle, but on geopolitical interest. The task before us is urgent: to resist imperialism, settler colonialism in all of its forms, and to lay the groundwork for a sustainable, just, and dignified peace. Israel's genocide in Gaza and the world's reaction to it is our window to the reality of the world we live in. A reminder that we don't live in a post-colonial world, but we live in a neo-colonial and an imperial one. The genocide in Gaza is also a warning, a preview of a dystopian future that is waiting for all of us if the impunity continues. Palestinians in Gaza are fighting not just for their survival, but for the principles that international law means something for a better future for all of us. This is the struggle for all of us, the allies of humanity, as I like to call us, against the brutality of the axis of genocide. Israel is an extension of Western colonialism and imperialism. Zionism, its founding ideology, is a racist, settler colonial project rooted in European racial hierarchies. It's inherently genocidal, exceptionalist, and expansionist. This was evident from the start. The statements of the founding fathers of Zionism left no room for doubt or interpretation about its settler colonial nature. So you don't need to take it from me. As Alexander Haig, former US Secretary of State under President Reagan, put it once, Israel is the largest American unsinkable aircraft carrier. That's what the US State of Secretary said. The EU, born from the ashes of genocide and colonialism, claims that international law, its moral compass. But when it comes to Palestine, it stands exposed as a craven accomplice. This genocide continues not just because of Israel's policy, but because of the international community's persistent failure to uphold international law and legal obligations. Yet, despite this bleak reality, cracks are forming in the wall of impunity, thanks to the courageous work of Palestinian struggle, solidarity, movements, and allies, principal voices within international institutions. The ICJ's provisional measures, the orders of the International Court of Justice, were clear. Israel's action plausibly amount to acts of genocide. Yet, some EU states undermined the case. Some called it even unhelpful, failing not just their legal obligations, in my view, but also their humanity. The ICJ's successive provisional measures are not optional. There is a legal obligation not only to punish those who commit genocide, but also to prevent it, especially from states who can have influence on Israel. Some states even went further. They declared the intention to refuse to cooperate with the ICC on arrest warrants of Israeli criminals. Hungary, for example, welcomed Israeli fugitives, ignoring its obligations under the ICC statute. Others remain shamefully silent when the US is sanctioning ICC officials and judges, including EU citizens. The ICJ's recent advisory opinion reaffirmed the illegality of Israel's occupation and the apartheid regime it sustains. And yet, some EU states continue to send Israel weapons, money, and provide political and diplomatic coverage. The hypocrisy, double standards of Western states, including EU members, could not be more glaring. While they claim to champion human rights and international law in other conflicts, in Ukraine, for example, they shield Israel from accountability at every turn. These actions expose a profound legal failure and moral bankruptcy. These governments are not just bystanders to genocide, they are complicit in it. This brings me to the European Left Alliance and the broader progressive movement in Europe. It is not enough to oppose war and imperialism in the abstract. We must dismantle the structures, legal, economic, political, that sustain them. To complement what have been mentioned throughout the past 2 days, I will provide 5 concrete actions the European Left Alliance should prioritize and advocate for at the level of the EU. 1, end arms transfer to Israel. EU member states, including Germany, France, Italy, and others, including the UK, who's not in the EU, continue to supply arms to Israel. Under the arms trade treaty, the EU common position, customary international law, and every international law there is an obligation on these states. It's not a matter of choice. It's not a matter of policy. It's a legal obligation to suspend arms exports to Israel. So European Left Alliance must call for an immediate and total arms embargo on Israel, an end to dual-use exports and military industrial cooperation, the suspension of existent export licenses, and the cancellation of defense contracts. 2, suspend the EU-Israel Association Agreement. This agreement grants Israel preferential trade access. Article 2 makes respect of human rights a condition. That condition is clearly not being met. ELA must demand the immediate suspension of agreements until Israel fully complies with international law. A review of all trade and cooperation agreements, involving Israeli settlements or apartheid institutions. And this is one of the points that is mind-blowing for me. Israeli companies benefit from Israeli illegal settlements built on stolen land, steal Palestinian resources, and then have open market in Europe competing with European producers. So Europe is not only supporting Israel to commit crimes, it's actually harming its own economy and its own people for the benefit of an apartheid regime. 3, support of the enforcement of the ICJ and the ICC decisions. This includes publicly reaffirming the authority of both courts, committing to arrest and surrender any individual subject to ICC warrants, opposing US and Israeli attempts to sanction or delegitimize the ICC. 4, recognize the reality of apartheid. UN experts, human rights organizations, Palestinian and international alike, have established that Israel is committing apartheid. The EU must stop hiding behind euphemisms and acknowledge this reality. ELA should advocate for a formal recognition of Israeli apartheid at the EU level, push for trade sanctions against institutions and officials responsible for it, targeted sanctions against them, support Palestinian efforts for legal redress at national and international levels. Finally, 5, reaffirm and reframe the question of peace. Peace is not the absence of violence. It is the presence of justice. Calls for ceasefire or dialogue are hollow and meaningless if they ignore the root causes: occupation, apartheid, settler colonialism, and displacement. The European Left Alliance must champion a decolonial framework for peace based on international law and human rights, based on justice. The Palestinian people's right to self-determination and the right of Palestinian refugees to return. The dismantling of the structure of domination, not just their regulation. To conclude, from Gaza to Ukraine and beyond, international law is under siege and under attack. But it's not dead, it's not too late. It is being reclaimed by the people in the streets, by movements, by victims, by those who still believe in its promise, and those who still have the courage to put principle first and speak truth to power. The European Left Alliance has a vital role to play. not as a spectator or a neutral broker, but as a force of solidarity committed to dismantling imperialism, confronting complicity, and building a future that is rooted in justice, equality, and peace. The path is not easy, but the stakes are clear. Palestinians have never given up on international law, not because it has protected us, but because we still believe in what it could offer for all of us. We ask you, all the allies of humanity, to believe in it too and act accordingly. ELA can lead the call for a principled EU foreign policy, one that is not driven by US alignment, arms industry interest, or colonial nostalgia, but by the universal of application of international law and human rights. The Palestinians are not asking for more than their basic human rights. They're not asking for charity. As a matter of fact, we're not even asking. We're demanding our rights. We're entitled to those rights, regardless of what other people think or believe. The Palestinian people are demanding justice to achieve peace. As former Nuremberg prosecutor, the late Benjamin Franz once put it, there can be no peace without justice, and no justice without law, and no meaningful law without a court to decide what is just and lawful under any given circumstance. The promise of international law, justice, accountability, and self-determination must now be delivered. Once again, thank you for the invitation, and hopefully next time we meet in a free Palestine. From the river to the sea, Palestine will be free. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And as I said, the first statement ELA did was on solidarity with Ukraine. And the first action that this Congress decided upon was to launch a European Citizens Initiative in solidarity with Palestine, addressing one of the issues that you raised, the issue of stopping the EU association agreement on the basis of breaching international law and human rights. Thank you so much for being here. Now I will give the floor to my colleague and friend from my time when I was a member of European Parliament, Faik Yagizai from the Dem Party, but former HDP, working, of course, for the democratization, self-determination, and a light of hope, I would say, in Turkey and beyond in terms of peace process and democratization process in a region that is being more and more authoritarian under the leadership of Erdogan. I think this struggle is something that the left, the European Left Alliance parties have been carried all along. We have activists and members and party leaders standing up in this process, and it's very important to have your voice and to guide us, and that this is part of our very founding Congress. So thank you so much for being here, and the microphone is yours, Faik.
Thank you very much, Malin. Thank you very much, Catherine. And thank you very much, all friends coming from the European Parliament, and thank you for Ella for inviting me here. I'm Faik Yagizai, representing Dem Party now, but still I'm holding a file of HDP. And before this, there was another BDP. Before it, it was DEHAP. Before it, it was HADEP, DEP, ÖZDEP. Many parties were closed down by the Turkish Constitutional Court, and we created a new one, and we continue our struggle. And now we are bigger, and we are more powerful everywhere in the world. Yes, when I listen to our friends from Ukraine and Palestine, and when we look at the general situation of the world, we can very easily see that there is no longer international law. There is no longer international functioning institutions. There is no longer any rule of law, but unfortunately now there is the rule of power, which we all are suffering from all over the world. And when we look at our time, unfortunately we see that it looks like 100 years ago, just at the eve of First World War, and the same powers are still acting to share the power, to occupy parts of the world, and to go on their colonial rule of the world. When we look at the attacks of Israel on Palestine, it is a complete genocide against the humanity, not only Palestinian people, but all humanity. And unfortunately, when we see the silence of the world, it's a shame for the world. And when we look at the situation in Ukraine, again, complete destruction of the international law. Yes, the international law was created after the First World War, then renewed after the Second World War, which unfortunately the Kurdish people did not have any place, any status in the international law that is now functioning, which is not functioning any longer. For example, the Kurdish people were divided. The Kurdistan was divided into two during the 17th century between the Ottoman Empire and the Iranian Empire. And after the First World War, after the collapse of Ottoman Empire, Kurdistan again were divided into three, and now it is four parts. One in Iran, one in Iraq, one in Syria, and the biggest part, half of Kurdistan, in Turkey. And in every part of Kurdistan, unfortunately, the Kurdish people are suffering. We are not recognized as a people. We are not recognized officially as a minority even. We don't have the right of minorities. When the international law was established, unfortunately, we were deprived of our rights of being a people. Now in Turkey, officially we are recognized as Turks. In Iran, we are recognized as Iranian people. And in Iraq, in Syria, officially we are not recognized as Kurdish people. Recently, especially in Iraq, after the intervention of the United States in Iraq, the Kurdish people had their autonomy. Of course, after a big, long struggle and genocides, even chemical weapons in Halabja, everybody remember this. And many other genocides, the Kurdish people could get some rights in a federal system, some autonomy in Iraqi Kurdistan. But when we look at Iranian Kurdistan, unfortunately you hear every day the executions of the Kurdish politicians just because of their political struggles. And you remember the Xinjiang Azadi uprisings after the killing of a Kurdish woman by the Iranian morality police. And you know the situation in Syria, especially after the civil war in Syria, because of the power vacuum in Syria, the Kurdish people organized themselves and defended their areas. When it was attacked by ISIS, they succeeded to stop ISIS and even to defeat it. Of course, that time we got support from international powers as well. But the Kurdish people gave more than 10,000 lives in order to defend their homeland. And now, of course, we have created an autonomous administration, which is more direct democracy, including all different minorities, religious and ethnic minorities, and having a peaceful coexistence and giving the right to the gender equality, and of course for ecology. While waiting for this system, democratic system, to be applied for all Syria, yes, the imperial powers succeeded to collapse the Assad's regime, but replaced by a former Al-Qaeda or ISIS terrorist who is now ruling Syria, became the president of Syria, al-Shara, and accepted by international big powers, met Trump, invited by Macron to France, and international sanctions are being lifted. So now we Kurds still are suffering there. Of course, we are trying to defend our land, defend our region, but at the same time, democratize all Syria. We are not only attacked by this, but also attacked by Turkey. We are attacked by other regional and Islamist powers in the region. And when we come to Turkey, after the creation of Turkish Republic, even the Kurds helped Mustafa Kemal Atatürk to create a new state out of the Ottoman Empire's ashes to fight the imperial powers. But unfortunately, just after the liberation of Turkey, according to the new Turkish constitution, the Kurdish people were denied of their identity. And since then, we are struggling for our rights, fundamental rights, for our identity, for our existence, for our culture, for our language. And, you know, during the 1970s, the PKK was created and started an armed struggle against the Turkish state for an independent Kurdistan. But just after the struggle, the collapse of Soviet Union, the end of Cold War, made the PKK struggle also not to be successful. And since then, since 1993, the PKK is searching for a peaceful solution to the Kurdish question within the existing borders. And we, as DEM party, which we had our party, first party in 1990, DEP, then HEP, DEP, HADEP, and still now going on, we are struggling for having democratic rights, democratic politics, and cultural rights, linguistic rights of Kurdish people. But we paid a lot of price for this. For example, the first Kurdish woman elected as a member of parliament, Leyla Zana, many of you maybe know her, because of talking only 2 sentences in Kurdish, she stayed in prison for 10 years. She was awarded Sakharov Peace Prize, but there is not any change of the Kurdish situation. Now our co-chair, Selahattin Demirtas, again is in prison. Figen Yüksekdağ, a co-chair, is in prison. We elect our mayors, but they are dismissed and being replaced by the governors, the trustees, and put in prison. or forced to be refugees in exile. There are more than 10,000 political prisoners from our party now in Turkey. And now, at the moment, of course, we are going on our struggle in a democratic way. And as we all know, the PKK, after the call of Mr. Öcalan, decided to stop armed struggle and continue its struggle through democratic means and to dissolve itself. Of course, it was a good decision and welcomed by everybody in Turkey, in Kurdistan, because the PKK played an important role for the Kurdish people to stop assimilation, to be recognized by the international powers, but could not, of course, liberate the Kurdish people, and now is being used against the Turkish state especially, like a weapon against all democratic demands of the Kurdish people. For example, when we ask for any rights for Kurdish people, Turkish state is using the PKK as a weapon, as a device, or as an argument to close down our parties, to arrest our mayors, to arrest our co-chairs. And in Rojava, for example, Turkish state is attacking Rojava and saying that the Rojava Kurdish organizations are linked with the PKK. So the dissolution of the PKK and stopping the armed struggle, but going on the struggle through democratic and peaceful means, will open a new opportunities for Kurdish people to be recognized among the international powers, international community, and get more support from the international powers, we believe. So we think that the Kurdish people, which is the biggest nation in the world without a state, is now a big actor, an important actor for democratization of the Middle East. And as you know, in the Middle East, there are a lot of problems. Most of the problems now at the moment are in the Middle East. As you see, Israel is a big threat for the peace of all the world and acting in Middle East and trying to be dominant in the Middle East. And unfortunately being supported by the big powers, by the United States, by the European Union, but many other big powers in the world. And there is not any limits for destruction of the international law. So we say that we, the progressive forces, all should come together and work together in order to defend the international law, to defend the rule of law, the human rights, the democracies, the ecology, the women's rights, which we, as party, we have a co-presidency system, for example. We have one man and one woman. And in all our organizations, for example, mayors, officially, even it is not recognized, we have one elected mayor, but de facto another co-mayor from our party. In Rojava, we have a co-presidency system in our system, one man and one woman. And also when there are not only the Kurds, but some other peoples living there, we have one Kurd and one non-Kurd, one Arab, one Assyrian, one Armenian, or one other representative of the people. So we believe that we progressive forces should come together to defend the democracy, and we should fight for the peace, because the war is the destruction of the rights of the workers, of women, of ecology, militarization of the society, etc., etc. So we should fight first for peace, for democracy, we should try to build a democratic society, organizing the society to defend themselves, and to give more importance to the local democracy, direct democracy. And of course, we need to struggle for the new world order, which now at the moment has been destroyed. For example, the United Nations, which is an umbrella organization, even in Palestine, while working there for human rights, they lost hundreds of their personnel, but United Nations could not defend their own people. So it has become a useless organization. United Nations, which is the Security Council, represented by 5, which never agree on any issue. So it's blocked on every important issues in the world. So it should be reformed. And we should struggle for a new order, world order, for democracy, for peace, for the human rights, and for the liberation of all peoples together. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Faik, from the Dem Party, and your calls for democratization and this very deep meaning of how you build democracy. I think is valuable, not only as a tool of resistance, of course, as you use it, but also for us in the European Left Alliance, in our European democracies, to deepen the democratic struggles also in our countries. So in that sense, it is really a partnership that we are having with you. So thank you very much for being here. Now I will move over to give the floor to some of the European Left Alliance party leaderships. We have here with me, and I will introduce you, Li Andersson from Vasemmistoliitto, which is the Finnish Left Alliance. You're a member of the European Parliament and have been very active in working on these issues of international solidarity and protecting international law. So the microphone is yours.
Thank you very much, Malin, and thank you very much for the invitation. I think it's an honor to be in a panel with all these distinguished guests and colleagues speaking about these topics that I think are one of the most important discussions to have for the left in Europe and elsewhere at this moment. As we have heard already, and as has already been mentioned in this panel, the greatest threat against democracy, against peace, against human rights and international law at this moment is the rise to power of these authoritarian right-wing leaders in the global powers. Putin, Trump, Netanyahu, Erdogan, and Orban. I think it is important for the left to emphasize the interconnection between these leaders and to emphasize the ideology that these leaders share. That we see in their excluding form of nationalism, that we see in the way they attack democracy and they attack freedom of thought, freedom of speech within their own countries, how they attack pluralism, how they try to attack the independent trade unions and workers' rights, and how they all also jail and deport people without any kind of respect for rule of law or human rights. And it is of course clear that it is these authoritarian right-wing leaders that to a large extent bear the responsibility for the erosion of respect of international law that we are witnessing at the moment. Because their ideology is also based on imperialism, on colonialism, and on this expansionist view of the world being ruled only by power and force, not by rules, not by international law, not by human rights. So it is, as we heard, a rule of force and a rule of power. And this is what they all ideologically represent. They also make each other stronger. And I think that is a development that we are witnessing right now. It is no coincidence that Erdogan chose this moment for putting Imamoglu, the opposition leader, in jail. It is no coincidence that he chose this moment for even jailing foreign journalists, such as the Swedish journalist Joakim Medin, who went to Turkey to report on the demonstrations against Erdogan. It is no coincidence that Netanyahu right now has chosen to, in addition to the genocide in Gaza, also intensify attacks and killings and demolitions in the West Bank, which not should be forgotten in these discussions. And it is no coincidence that he chose this moment to attack Iran. It is no coincidence that Orban has chosen this moment to push forward legislation that would even in a worse way restrict the possibilities to act for the opposition within Hungary, for the NGOs within Hungary, for the media within Hungary. Because these leaders see each other becoming bolder and bolder by the inability of the world to act and to stop them. But the Western Bloc, if you want to use that kind of words, of course also bears responsibility for the erosion of respect for international law. We all know that Gaza is the graveyard of tens and tens of thousands of innocent people, of children and women, but it has also been called the graveyard of so-called Western values. And it risks turning into the graveyard of international law. The inability to even react properly to a crime of the scale and of gravity, such as the genocide in Gaza, has once again shown how selective the right wing in the West is when they talk about multilateralism and the rules-based order. But these double standards is nothing new. We have also seen them in the case of Erdogan, in the case of Turkey, where the European Union was very fine with looking between the fingers, ignoring Erdogan's attacks against the Kurds, against trade unions, against academics, against journalists, as long as he was willing to stop migrants from Syria from entering the European Union. They were even fine with paying him money while he was doing all of these repressions, as long as he was stopping migrants from entering the European Union. And we also see these same developments within the European Union at the moment. My home country, Finland, accepted a law to close down the eastern border between Finland and Russia, including eradicating the right to seek asylum at any point on the eastern border, even though it was clearly stated in Parliament by experts that this law is openly in contradiction with both EU law and international human rights law that bind countries such as Finland. And this is the first time ever, as far as I know, in the history of my country, where you openly agree to a law that is in contradiction in this way with binding rules in international law. As soon as the government in Finland did this trick, you saw in Poland, Poland already de facto was breaking the same norms of international law at the borders between Poland and Belarus, with pushing back migrants in an illegal way. But Poland had not, before Finland did this law, legalized pushbacks within their legislation. But now we have it in Finland, we have it in Poland, and I would be very surprised if we would not see pushes on the level of the European Union to, in the same way, also legalize pushbacks when it comes to the EU legislation concerning the right to asylum. Finland is also withdrawing from the Ottawa Agreement, banning landmines. And we have seen the case of Denmark, the Danish Social Democratic Prime Minister, who went to Italy to meet Giorgia Meloni, and for them to together make a press statement gathering countries to openly criticize the European Convention on Human Rights. And I quote their argument, for limiting their possibilities to make political decisions in their own democracies. And this is, of course, exactly the point of international human rights conventions. Their point is to limit the possibilities of legislators to make decisions that are contrary to fundamental human rights and freedoms. So the most important tasks for the left, as I see it at this moment. First, I think it's very important for the left to emphasize the ideology of what is happening and the interconnections between these authoritarian leaders. We sometimes, and I see it in the debates in the European Parliament, that we sometimes have a tendency to talk about war and peace in a way that actually ignores the ideology of what is going on. The war in Ukraine did not start by itself. It was not the European Union that initiated the war in Ukraine. It was initiated by a man who has a name and an ideology, and that was Vladimir Putin. The genocide in Gaza was initiated by a man who must also bear criminal responsibility for what he has done, a man with a name and an ideology, Benjamin Netanyahu. And that is why we in the left, of course, must support Ukrainians when the Ukrainians fight back against imperialism and authoritarianism. That's why we must work together with the Ukrainian left, who is doing two struggles at the same time, the struggle against Russian imperialism and the struggle against the neoliberalism of the leaders within Ukraine. And that is, of course, also why we must fight and support the Palestinians against this horrible, massive crime of genocide going on in Gaza, and support the Kurds in the fight for self-determination, a principle of international law that absolutely should apply to the Kurdish people and the Kurdish question. I have said that I think the left must articulate a foreign policy of anti-fascism, because I think that is the correct way of bringing out the ideology of what is happening now. In addition to supporting those who are fighting back, we must also support those who at the moment are trying to use the structures of international law, who are actually trying to stop the erosion of this system. Because you see that development at the same time. We saw how South Africa taking the lead to take the case of the genocide in Gaza to the International Criminal Court. We have seen the formations of new groups of countries, the Hague Group, for example, who are trying to work together to strengthen the structures of international law. And we are seeing civil society at the moment emphasizing the binding nature of the advisory opinion of the International Court of Justice. And the binding nature of that advisory opinion means that every country has a legal obligation to act against occupation and against the apartheid rule of Israel. And we also need new political initiatives, I think, to unite the global North and the global South. Because one consequence of the inability of the right-wing leaders in the West to address what is going on in Gaza is an increasing divide and an increasing rift of a political divide, which has, of course, always been there based on all of the injustices that we have seen in the international politics, but an increasing divide between the global North and the global South. And I think the left should be at the forefront of cooperating and bringing forward political initiatives that we can cooperate and work together on and unite different actors within the global South and the global North. And my final point, we also need to develop policies to decrease dependencies on these authoritarian leaders. And for all the horrors of this current situation, I think it also opens some interesting windows of opportunities for the left. I have never before been in a situation where I'm sitting in a TV debate saying that we need to stop funding the US arms industry and a right-wing MEP says, yes, I agree with you completely. And never before have I been in a situation where, you say that we should ban the sale of Tesla cars, or we should introduce digital taxes on the big tech companies, and the right wing is, maybe they are not agreeing, but they're at least not disagreeing with us when we put forward these kinds of proposals. And there was even in the right-wing dominated European Parliament a resolution where the European Parliament is saying that we need a NATO that is able to operate independently of the US, which is of course an anomaly. It's impossible, but they were still willing to say that in this current situation. So I also think this opens up possibilities for the left to push forward solutions based on a Europeanization of security architecture, of stop funding the US arms industry, of less independency and autonomy when it comes to energy, stopping buying fossil fuels from Russia, but also stop importing very expensive LNG from the US by investing in renewables, by investing in the climate policy within the European Union. But most of all, we need a policy, I think, of joining forces, of working together, of describing this ideological shift in the right way. And I know that sometimes we have maybe opted out from discussions on defense and security, but I actually think that the left has a lot to win from being very vocal and visible and from participating in discussions on defense, security, on foreign policy, on everything that is going on in the world at the moment, because people are worried. And my impression is that there are so many persons out there who are longing for voices that talk about democracy, that talk about the importance of human rights, of international law, that talk about the importance of social justice, of respect, and of human dignity, and that also show people that we are willing to fight for those values. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Lee, for talking about all these interconnections and how the left has this responsibility to have an answer against the authoritarianism and the neoliberalism and the imperialism, and what this has to do also with our ability to talk about defense and security. We were together in Ukraine, in Kiev, and we have met Vitaly there. And I must tell you, if the left thinks that we cannot discuss defense or security, that discussions that we had in Kiev, I think it proved that parties with different approaches, but of course common goals, although with different approaches, we had really open talks in Ukraine, in Kiev, with people that are living in Ukraine, that are fighting the war about the defense and security. And the left could do it, as I believe, and it was other parties could not have done, I believe, those kind of talks, and I think we've learned from that. And so we've discussed it, we have common goals, and I think we are learning how to make this discussion and not letting the right and the center to forbid the meaningful discussions, so that the left also has an answer. So it's my pleasure also to present Julio Rodriguez. Julio Rodriguez was chief of staff in the Spanish army, and now he is the Podemos Secretary for Peace and Security. The floor is all yours. Gracias, Julio.
Thank you very much for the invitation. Thank you very much, everybody, for being here. I have been prepared to address my speech in Spanish, but I think it's not very polite to be the only one not using the English. Let me please to read some words. It may seem a contradiction for someone in the military to feel increasingly anti-militarist and pacifist, but there is no contradiction in that. because being anti-militarist does not mean being against the military. A soldier does not believe that weapons should be the guarantors of law and order, but rather that they serve the democratic powers elected by the people. I also believe that having witnesses the horrors of war, a member of the military must by necessity be a pacifist, and that is not easy in circumstances that require a cold and objective attitude in order to identify risks and to think of realistic solutions. So, for a soldier to declare themselves anti-militarist and pacifist is not a contradiction. It is rather a self-evident truth, almost a tautology. As those who knows the horror of wars, they should love peace more than anyone. Or does anyone believe the firefighters love the fire? Another obvious point, if you're looking for more apparent contradictions, the debate on security should be taken away from those who call themselves experts. It's about applying common sense and helping people understand the true burden of this arms race. It's about appealing to reason and sanity, to genuine generosity and well-understood solidarity. Because if Clemenceau, the French Prime Minister during the Third Republic, could say during the World War I that war is too serious a matter to be left to the military, today we could adapt that and say that peace is too delicate a matter to be left in the hands of those who treat weaponry as an economic stimulus. We live in times when advocating to peace is equated with taking naive or idealistic stances. We see how some journalists or politicians, often with no ties with the military, greatly contribute to the militarization of conflicts, relying heavily on fear-based strategies. In that context, within Podemos, we always say that sending weapons to Ukraine was ineffective. It was difficult to say that at this time, but we were convinced that it would only serve to fuel and prolong the conflict. War is the failure of politics, and putting all our eggs in the war basket is an admission that everything else has failed. Negotiations, dialogue, and diplomacy must be prioritized. To ridicule these paths, to abandon the very tools that could save us from conflict, especially in nuclear context, where everyone loses. As we said about saving the lives that are lost every single day that the conflict continues, war makes any other option unviable. It was urgent to stop it and a priority not to fuel further. That is why we believe that speaking of both peace and war is a contradiction. We must speak only of peace, and do so especially when it is harder, when they don't want us to talk about it, or when those with vested interest in war delay all negotiations and dismantle every proposed ceasefire alternative. We have no right to speculate about how long it might take to reach an agreement, as has been the case in Ukraine. It now seems that Ukraine may accept the handover of the Crimea Peninsula and the Russian occupation since 2014 and effectively give up 4 regions partially controlled by Russians. The agreement also includes the creation of a fund granting the US priority access to new investment projects aimed at exploiting Ukraine's natural resources. The Trump administration has informed Congress that it will be over $50 million of weapons to Ukraine And that is the first package of new military assistance, although this time Kiev is purchasing the equipment. It is no longer a donation as it was during the first 3 years of the war. In other words, those who warned that, as with most wars, the conflict in Ukraine was not about the fight for freedom, but all about imperial interests. They were right. It wasn't a war for democracy in Europe, but for US access to resources, as Trump has confirmed. Meanwhile, the European Union wants us to accept investing in tanks instead of hospitals, and to believe that Putin is about to arrive in Madrid or Lisbon riding a beer. It is the classic example of a proxy war, when major powers settle their interests using third-party countries instead of confronting each other directly. But let us not forget that to the third-party countries involved, these wars do not end when the weapons fail silent. They leave behind a mark that takes society years to overcome. The post-war periods are as violent as the wars themselves. It is therefore an ethical duty as citizens to oppose war escalations that benefit no one, only a few countries' interest. As European citizens, we cannot allow the European Union, founded as a peace project, to become a project of war. As German General Kujat, that was chairman of the NATO Military Committee, said at the time, the war in Ukraine is not only a military conflict, it is also an economic and informational war. And in this war of information, citizens often become participants by accepting information and arguments that we cannot verify or evaluate. At what cost? The Ukrainians now have the answer. We are talking now about territorial losses, percentage of rare earth minerals, and the return of what was donated. Really a disaster. All wars are terrible. Whether they are just, chosen, unjust, or unjustifiable, they are always evidence of the failure of politics. Any prospect of lasting peace in the times that we are living must be tied to a new concept of security. A new concept of security that must be understood in its broadest sense and brought into public debate, a debate that has long been hidden, distorted, or left in the hands of the so-called battle-hardened experts. Today, the global competition is about partial domains, a specific sector or areas, not total dominance, which has become impossible for any single country. To put it in another way, data control is more effective than control of bayonets. And in this domain, the major rivalry lies between the US and China, and it is through non-military means that the future of global hegemony will be decided, regardless of how much rearmament occurs. It is therefore surprising how frivolously our involvement in armed conflict and rearmament policy is being handled without any prior debates. Militarism and rearmament are the result of those old security doctrines from which disastrous policies derive, policies that far from generating security produce the opposite. In the 1980s, ideas and concepts such as the shared security, the non-provocative defenses, and mutual incapacity not to attack emerged in a collective effort to overcome the dilemmas of the Cold War. The Olof Palme report had a huge impact, and it was centered on the principles that my security is your security, and your security is my security. More than 40 years later, it seems incredible that we are witnessing a massive regression from those proposals. No neutral countries and strengthened NATO, more dependent on the US than ever, a weakened Organization for Security and Coordination in Europe, Germany, the European Union engine increasing its military budget and considering participating in the nuclear umbrella, and a Polish prime minister advocating for Poland to include nuclear weapons in the security race. Are we crazy? The process of militarizing politics is a path that leads us to the same place as always, disaster. The European Union was built out of the experience of war as a space of peace. We must not fall into the trap of thinking that a random increase, 2%, 3.5%, 5% of the GDP in arms spending provides greater security. Perhaps some of the usual suspects are thinking of using these expenditures as a stimulus for the economic metabolisms. The arms race impoverishes us all and enriches a few. Worldwide, according to the data, $2.7 trillion were spent on armaments in 2024. That is the amount of money needed to achieve the Sustainable Development Goals, that is, to eradicate hunger, providing health services, education, housing, and electricity for all inhabitants of the developing world. Using armaments as an economic stimulus is madness, a burden that our children and grandchildren will have to pay for. We know that the pandemic and the war have pushed the seams of the European Union to the breaking point. Amid rising geopolitical tensions and the acceleration of the climate emergency, the European Union has revealed itself as a declining power, a region dependent on external resources that can only maintain the profits of the ruling classes through the constant bailout of these member states. After the recession caused by COVID, the economic recovery was initially based on a massive injections of public funds and the business adaptations to the energy transition and digitalizations. The invasion of Ukraine later resulted in a strengthened migration control and push to advance European defense policies. The green and digital capitalisms, the model for post-pandemic capitalist recovery, have turned into military green capitalism. The decision has been made to strengthen the triad of militarizations, borders, and extractivisms through policies that are implemented internationally via a renewed regulatory package with which the European Union seeks to reposition itself in the global order or disorder. Alongside increased military budgets, reindustrializations through arms manufacturing, and fortifying Fortress Europe through border outsourcing, the European Union has redesigned its soft power instruments to project itself globality. All this is disguised by saying that after the hostility shown by Trump towards the European Union and NATO, we are obliged to raise awareness and take responsibility for our security. NATO Secretary General states that member states should reach 5.5% of GDP in defense spending by 2032. This is not a figure of his own invention, but a service response to Trump's demand. There is nothing new in these huge demands for greater European participations in NATO's coast burden. Many presidents both Democrats and Republicans, have been demanding it for years. What is new is the demand for a president who views foreign relations purely from a mercantilist perspective. Hence, the self-interested link between defense spending and tariffs. But the truth is that Trump not only does not want to reduce his own defense spending in Europe, which he's not doing, but withdraw parts of the US troops, which he's also not doing, but he proposed to keep the European arms market captive. Saying that more must be spent on arms in order to achieve supposed greater security will be difficult to explain to those who are truly concerned about their security. In that broader sense that we advocate human security, housing security, economic security, ecological security, etc. Ultimately, security is also a matter of priorities and must be defined by the sovereign people. The questions many people in Europe ask themselves are we at the doorstep of a third world war? Does Russia intend to invade Europe or part of it? And we warned of that during the Cold War. Is the perception that we're highly threatened justified? Does it make sense to rearm to the teeth at unprecedented levels? Is Europe unprotected without the United States? In my opinion, the answer is no. And what to do? But we must change perceptions, narratives, doctrines, and the military capabilities of both sides. They're willing to recover doctrines, initiatives, and policies that have worked well in the past. In reality, there is not much to invent. This involves seeking spaces for dialogue, rethinking the European security architecture, and building a shared security space in which no one can be excluded, which means Russia must be also included. Security is something that goes beyond the military, and the rearmament machine has been set in motion, and we must act quickly. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Yolo Rodriguez. I think we've been discussing new concepts of security in the left, and I think this is something that we have to work on, and your contribution to it's really important. And now I give the floor to Pelle Dragstedt. Pelle is a member of the Danish Parliament. He's also the leader of the Red Green Alliance. Thank you so much for being here, Pelle. The floor is yours.
Thank you so much, and hi to you all. I'm so proud of being here at this so very important Congress, to be at the panel with good friends from the European left, but also with representative for 3 people struggling against fascism and for your freedom. I think international solidarity has always been a key DNA of the left, and it should be a key DNA of the ELA now and in the future. So thank you so much for being here with us. Today's discussion on security, on Ukraine, on Palestine is urgent, because what we're witnessing right now is imperialist forces undermining the very pillars, the very basis of international law, as we have heard from Lee and other on the panel. Right now we see in Ukraine, the bombs keeps falling on Kiev and other major city, and the Ukrainian people are fighting against the war machine of Putin. A war from Putin with the clear stated end of doing away with Ukraine as an independent sovereign nation. That's what that war is about. In Palestine, the people are enduring day after day the catastrophic genocidal war of Israel, not only by bombs, but also a war by hunger, by thirst, a slaughter of innocent people. It is a disgrace, and it is an assault on humanity itself, as we heard from my good Kurdish friend. But we're also witnessing in this time a shameful show of hypocrisy and double standards from our government, not least my own. Because at the one hand, they rightfully condemn the Russian war of aggression, the war crimes of Russia in Ukraine, but at the same time, they will not apply the same principles when it comes to the genocide in Palestine. And I think a major task for us, and I agree on the good points made by other panelists, is to fight for the international law. That no nation is above the law, that no human being, no people are below the right to human rights, to dignity, to life. Israel should be met with the same demands, the same sanctions, the same condemnation, the same international isolation as Russia. And that is one of our most important tasks as the European left, is to fight against this hypocrisy and this double standard in order to uphold international law. Because our Palestinian friend is right, this is not just about Palestine, this is about the basis of the international system and our own rights as citizens not to be oppressed by fascist forces. So at the same time, we have Donald Trump back in the White House, more dangerous, more aggressive than ever before. Of course, it's a danger to his own people, to workers, to women, to LGBT persons, and of course to migrants that are now rounded up and deported without any court hearings. But he's also threatening other countries. He's threatening Panama, he's threatening Canada, he's threatening Europe with damaging trade wars. And yes, we're not used to imperialist threats to our country, but he's also threatening Denmark and Greenland. So we're in a situation where we not only have to deal with one aggressive autocrat to the east, but also to his Siamese twin to the west. And that's a difficult task because Europe, throughout decades, have been in a dangerous, submissive relationship to US imperialist projects. And that's make it even more difficult to disentangle from this dependency. But we have to do it. We need to set ourselves free, to set Europe free from this bad romance that have went even more bad after Trump went into office. In Denmark, as my colleague told yesterday, our government has reacted by opening up our territories for the first time in Danish history to American military bases. That is a disgrace. We should do the exact opposite. Instead of inviting the bully into our house, we should shut the bully out of our continent, out of Europe. And that requires that we get more independent in different areas. And yes, military independence is one. We need to be independent of US weapon system, building our own defense capabilities in Europe. For the same reason, we have to work towards digital independence. We cannot have our digital system, our payment system, our public data in the hands of a group of oligarchs surrounding Trump. We have seen Trump is ready to use any dependence to put forward his authoritarian project. We saw it some weeks ago when they shut down the mail system of the International Criminal Court. Why? Because independent lawyers of this court had issued an arrest warrant for the war criminal Benjamin Netanyahu. We cannot accept that kind of independence, and we have to build our digital independence from the US and from the US tech oligarchs. Then we have to protect our democracies in Europe, because we're getting used to Putin interfering in European elections. But what we are witnessing now is that Trump and his oligarchs are doing the same, paying for campaigns for the most extremist right-wing forces across the continent. We need to build a kind of sanitary cordon to protect our democracies against oligarchic billions, against oligarchic interference. But at the same time, we have another really important task as a European left, and that is to uphold and to stress, as our Spanish friend said, that fighting oligarchic authoritarian forces is not just about military or defense. It's also about social defense. Because our strongest bulwark against fascism, it is our welfare, it is social security, it is our trade unions, it is our collective agreements. Because we know what happens. We have seen it over and over again. When people are economically, socially insecure, that is fertile ground for Trump, for Putin, and for all kinds of authoritarian demagogues. So we should reject the dangerous notion that in order to become independent, military independent from the United States, that should be on the expense of our welfare, on our social security, of the workers' rights. Because social welfare is not a luxury to be sacrificed. It is, in fact, our strongest defense against fascist forces. They should not be weakened, they should be strengthened. And we should also be crystal clear. We should support the struggle of the Ukrainian people, the Palestinian people, and also be ready to defend our democracies. But commitment to self-defense, commitment to military independence from the US must never overshadow our unwavering support, commitment to peace. We must actively all the time pursue peaceful conflict resolution. Because dialogue, diplomacy, international cooperation are not signs of weakness, as some of our leaders are trying to tell us. They are the only path to sustainable and just peace. But on the other hand, we must never forget what anti-fascism also means. It means that when authoritarian forces are on the rise, we stand up and we fight. Now, as then, the answer is no pasarán. You will not pass, not in Ukraine, not in Palestine, not in Kurdistan, not in Greenland, not in Europe, not anywhere. We will stand up and fight. Together we must and we will stand up for peace, for security, and for international solidarity. Thank you so much for letting me speak.
Thank you. So you heard the finalizing speech here already. So from the ELA side. But we want to take the opportunity to give the microphone back to our three guests for a few words at the end here. So you will have to bear with us a little tiny bit of your lunch, and I will start to give the floor to you, Vitaly, from Socialny Ruch.
Okay, I will try to be short and diplomatic. So, as all the speakers noticed, now the whole world is watching at the battle between Russia and the Ukrainian people. But we, as Ukrainian left, cannot allow the luxury to be just as spectators. We are direct participants of this historical process, and we want to see our country as independent and free and prosperous, and we want to save as many lives as possible. In that condition, the post-war recovery on fair conditions is possible. If we lose our human potential, it will be extremely difficult. So for this case, we need to win the war against authoritarian Russian regime. So please help Ukraine to get everything needed to self-defense. First of all, arms, but also social and humanitarian support. And also we expect seizuring of Russian illegal assets in the European Union. And also we hope that you will help us to abandon in unfair foreign debt to make our people more strong and to satisfy their needs. Victory for Ukraine, no to fascism. Long live international solidarity.
Thank you. Thank you. I will give the floor to you now, Faik, to say a few words.
Thank you very much. Of course, we, the Kurdish people, like all other peoples in the world, we have the right to have our own state. But now we are struggling for our democratic and fundamental rights. Of course, there are some people who are still fighting for independent state, but we believe that in our time, fighting for justice, democracy, human rights, international order is more important than fighting for an anti-democratic nation state. So, but we need a world order which will also include those people who do not have a state. And we say that we need solidarity. We say long live struggle, long live resistance, and long live international solidarity. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And now I give the floor to Pew Ahmed.
Thank you. Like my friend from Ukraine, I'll be brief, but unlike him, I'll try not to be diplomatic because the time for diplomacy has passed, in my view. I wanted to share something with you. Actually, when I was invited, I was talking to some friends and family in Gaza, and I mentioned that I'm going to a conference for the left. And the amazing people they are in Gaza, always trying to find humor despite the pain and agony. I was surprised when one of my friends said, so Left Alliance in Europe will be in a conference for 2 days? I said, yes. And he said, 2 days under the same roof and they're not going to disagree? I said, that I don't know. Of course they're going to disagree, but the most important thing that we have the conversation. And I think they were referring to Palestinian left that almost never agrees. I don't know if the stereotype applies generally. But what I'm trying... That's what I'm hoping this event is a change to that. So my first point that I wanted to stress, and I changed actually my intervention because of what I heard yesterday, and I think it's still being said today. The problem with Israel is not Netanyahu, is not a right-wing government, it's an ideology. And I challenge every politician in the room and everyone, with all respect to your experience, to give me one name of an Israeli leader that didn't call for Palestinian displacement, who genuinely agreed to any form of political solution, including two-state solution, or did not dehumanize Palestinians in the history of Israel. I challenge you. If anyone can give me one name who didn't do that, left, right, middle, whatever. The whole idea of having liberal Zionist or left Zionist is a scam. There is no such a thing. They agree on one thing, that a Palestinian is a demographic problem. So my very existence is a threat to the ideology. That is the definition of racial hierarchies. That is the definition of racism. So there is no other way around it. I know politicians have a tendency to try to adjust realities to their conviction. That's not how intersectionality works. Intersectionality is a genuine reading of reality. And here I must comment on the term of global north and global south and the division. The division has its own historical roots. It's not from nothing. It's the shameful history of colonialism, slavery, and appropriation of global south resources. And please, can someone explain to me, what does this term mean? Does it refer to geographical location? Because last time I checked, India and many other states could be considered in the northern hemisphere, but they are global south. Australia is as south as you could ever get, but it is global north. So it's not about geography. It seems for me global white. So let's be honest about it. So all of these terms are like we use are just a way to conceal the ugly reality that what we call now how Europe is developed, or not third world, continent, is based on criminal acts, appropriation of resources of other people's land. We should not omit this fact. And at this point, I have to say, it's the colonial sentiment that somehow the West is in the best and the beast is in the East. I think it is time to realize that there is little best in the West, and definitely there are no beasts in the East. This is colonial sentiment. Another point I wanted to make is on the dystopian future ahead of us. Yes, it's not only about Palestine, and you start to seeing this now. It's about your civil liberty. Now your right of assembly is not guaranteed. Freedom of expression is not guaranteed. Infringement and attacks and crackdown on Palestinian solidarity, environmental solidarity, and environmental activists, tomorrow gender activists, etc. So it is about you. It's coming to you. This is not me foreseeing the future. This is the reality we live in. And that is why Palestine's liberation for us as Palestinians is inevitable. We know it. We see it. It's coming. All we do is trying to fasten the process, minimize the suffering of the Palestinian people. That is all. But Palestinian liberation, of course, needs you, needs all of us to contribute to it. Not only to liberate Palestine, but to liberate you in the process. Palestine is not only there for us to liberate, but it is there for us to liberate ourselves from the reality we live in. Capitalism was mentioned a lot. Individualism is a product of it, and in a way, that's what right wing usually do, is the trick of individualism is this golden cage that capitalism has taught us masterfully, I have to say, to build for ourselves, lock ourselves in, and accept to be slapped every once in a while, and believe that, yes, it's better than nothing. It's the lesser evil, so I will accept to continue being slapped because the alternative is bad. That is not true. That is the trap. And Palestine is there to liberate you from the prison you made for yourself. So solidarity. I conclude with this idea, with all due respect to many lefties here, veteran lefties with a lot of experience. My appeal is to the youth. Do not just take whatever political conviction of your parties. Future is yours. You have a tool that veteran politicians would never understand. It is true they have more experience than you are. It does not necessarily mean that they know better. Otherwise, no student would have ever surpassed their teacher. That is the reality of life. The future is yours. Focus on what you believe in. See reality as it is, stand for the right things, and you shall prevail. Thank you.
Okay, so that's a call from you to replace us all. I am all for that. I usually say that when I meet younger people, you know, take my place. It's all it is about. If I have 10 people that can't take my place, I have done the job well, I would say. So, and it's really true. I must say that I want to thank every speaker in this panel from behalf of Katarina and myself, both our partners in Ukraine, fighting for a free Ukraine, a safe and equal, with justice, economic and social rights, and that your struggle is also our struggle for a society that is democratic, safe, and where you have self-determination. I want to thank you, Faik, for coming here, and many of our parties have long-standing relationships together with the Kurdish people to fight for self-determination. The largest people without a country, without a nation, but you are a beacon of hope. I said that for democratization, for the peace process in a region that needs that so dearly. But you're also an inspiration for democratization in Europe and beyond. And I must thank you for coming all the way here and to be part of that. And this is just the start of our collaboration with the European Left Alliance. And finally, yeah, applause. Finally, of course, a special thank you also to you, Ahmed, for coming here. And as I said before, we are launching at this Congress an initiative addressing the impunity of Israel. And we are, and I will come back to that just over a second, we are a European political party made up of lefties in Europe and having parliamentary power in the European Parliament, in national parliament. And while we are also in the streets, we vow to you, but also to Ukraine, the struggle in Kurdistan, to stand up in those parliamentary spaces and use that power that we have there in that space to stand up for self-determination, for international law. And as you said so clearly, all of you from the ELA parties, Julio, Lee, Pelle, that in our world, there will be no double standards. There will be no double standards when it comes to the respect for international law, democracy, and human rights. We do not treat one country or one situation differently. And that would be the legacy of the left. Because while the right wing, they can only stand up for conflicts where they have some kind of interest or history. We will, in ELA, we will stand for international law, for the international system. We will stand for self-determination. And we know that there is a very, very hard process of doing that resistance, like you said, Pelle, to do, because the fascists, they have a very strong agenda, and they are on and they're threatening our institutions, the international one, but also the national ones. And some of us feel it also on our bodies and our lives in Europe as we speak, with women, LGBTI people, migrants that are dying at our borders, and the very, very, very racist narratives that we are hearing from fascist leaders around Europe. And also that shows, and what you highlighted so clearly, Ahmed, how this is connected. I think there is only one way to save us, maybe, and it is together. And that's why this panel was so important for us, for ELA, to have at our founding Congress. So thank you, everyone, and thank you, everyone in the room. And now there